You're probably quite surprised that I've said that main memory is slow. Of course, this is all relative. A hard disk is slow, a CD-ROM is slow. But let me give you an illustration. The average mobile CPU is clocked at somewhere between 1.5 gigahertz and 2.2 gigahertz. Now, the average RAM module in your mobile phone is clocked at just 200 megahertz. So you can see a big difference between 1.5 gigahertz and 200 megahertz. Whenever the CPU wants something, it has to talk to a device that's running 10 times slower than it is before it can get the information back. Now, in CPU terms, that's an absolute age. It has to sit around waiting for something, and therefore that affects the performance. Okay, I'll admit that's an oversimplified view of the problem. However, that is basically the issue that every system on a chip designer has to cope with. Now, because of things like double data rate memory, which can send 2 lots of data per clock, 200 megahertz suddenly now equals 400 megahertz. And in fact, the latest low power DDR3 is actually about 8 times the base rate clock speed that can push the data out to the CPU. In fact, the low power data rate 4 memory modules are working at effectively the same CPU frequency as 1.8 gigahertz. So if the CPU is running at 1.8 gigahertz and the memory effectively is running at 1.8 gigahertz, there shouldn't be any problem. Or should there? Well, in fact, we've got to remember that modern day CPUs have 4 or even 8 cores on them. So those 8 cores are all accessing the same one set of memory banks. And therefore, there is a contention here on who can get the data and when they can get it. So in fact, even though it's running at 1.8 gigahertz, because there are 8 CPUs trying to get hold of the data, actually it's still effectively a lot slower. Now, this is actually a very well-known problem in computer science, and it's what's known as the von Neumann bottleneck. Now, if you watch my video on assembly language and machine code, you'll remember that von Neumann was one of the key players in developing and designing what is a modern-day computer. Now, the von Neumann bottleneck is basically when the CPU is waiting for data in a resource that's slower than it, that creates a performance bottleneck where, in fact, the system is running at the speed of the slowest device, which in this case would be the RAM.